history of modern-day Congo is a tragic story. From half its population being wiped out by the Belgians, to a brutal dictator, to 2 civil wars in only 8 years, it's safe to say Congo has been through some rough times. The legacy of civil war in Congo is staggering. The country consistently ranks bottom in human rights abuses, level of corruption, and its children consistently face starvation. With a country so rich in natural resources, why is it struggling so much? Let's dive deeper. During the so-called Age of Discovery, the Belgians created what was called the Congo Free State, which is a pretty fucking ironic name. At the head of this free state was none other than Leopold II, and for 23 years he would commit some of the worst atrocities ever seen during the period of African colonialization. In just 23 years, he managed to mass murder half the population of this Congo Free State he created. This guy seriously gives Pol Pot and Mao a run for their money as far as percentages go. Not to mention he ran a work system that if you didn't meet his unrealistic quotas, he would cut your hands off. Yeah, say what you want about Amazon's quotas, but at least you get to keep your hands. Now, while Congo was not technically owned by Belgium, Leopold was pretty much given free rein after lying to the Berlin Conference by saying, "Oh, I'm just going to help the Congolese with humanitarian work." Now, while Leopold was eventually stripped of his power in the Congo Free State, it was 23 years too late, and Congo was stripped of its ivory, rubber, and minerals and left without any plan for reconstruction, kinda like the rest of Africa was in the 20th century. Congo finally got its independence in 1960. Now, while you think that finally meant the Belgians had their hands off Congo, you'd be horribly mistaken. You see, Congo would have its first democratically elected prime minister. This man, Patrice Lumumba, who promised to strengthen Congo's economy and led a Pan-Africanist movement away from Western reliance. The colonists care nothing for Africa for her own sake. They are attracted by African riches, and their actions are guided by the desire to preserve their interests in Africa against the wishes of the African people. For the colonists, all means are good if it helps them possess these riches. This infuriated the West, who accused Lumumba of being a communist and supported a violent rebellion and its support for a dictator who would later have him executed. America also heavily supported a man named Tshobe, who led a secessionist state called Katanga, which aimed to further destabilize Lumumba's government.
Congolese have been massacred by white people in the Congo for years and years and years. And if the shoe is now on the other foot, only thing I can say is it's like chickens that always come back home to roost.
Do you personally feel, though, that there's some shame or involvement here or some guilt associated with the killing of other human beings?
I think that the white people should be ashamed of the deplorable situation that has been existing in the Congo, which is not the fault of the Congolese, but which is the result of instigation by European powers who are fighting each other over the mineral wealth of the Congo. And now to make it appear that the Congolese themselves are criminals or brutes because they're reacting to these injustices that they've been victimized by is again ducking the question.
Shambi is the murderer of Lumumba, who was the rightful prime minister of the Congo. Shambi is the man whose forces fought against the United Nations forces and against the United States, and despite this criminal past of Shambi, now the United States is backing Shambi, who has hired South African mercenaries who are hired killers to disrupt the peaceful efforts of the freedom fighters from Stanleyville to make the type of country there that they want. And it is this American support of Shambi, actually.
This, along with its support for an American-sponsored dictator, would be the worst thing to happen to Congo since Leopold II. Now, how does America tie into this? Why does America care about a country thousands of miles away? You see, Congo gained independence in 1960, which just so happened to be the height of the Cold War. America badly needed something called cobalt for its fighter jets. It just so happened that Congo sits on half of the world's known cobalt collection. So America needed a way to extract the cobalt from Congo without having to worry about the Soviet Union doing the same thing. This is where this man comes to play, Mobutu Sese Seko. This man was heavily supported by America and many European countries to overthrow Lumumba's government. This eventually succeeded. Now, while there's speculation that the CIA was responsible for Lumumba's death, that's a whole nother story for a different video, so leave a comment if you want me to dive deeper. This isn't completely out of the realm of possibility, given the US already tried to assassinate another reviled leader, Fidel Castro, over 100 times and orchestrated the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. As early as 1960, the CIA recruited Seko to help mold a pro-American Congolese government. After Seko gained full power in 1965, America began to fully support and eagerly cooperate with his oppressive regime. America claimed that their support was based off the idea that Seko was an opponent of communism, but scholars argue that the real reason America heavily supported his regime is that he was willing to embezzle billions of dollars from Congo while receiving massive financial support from the world's largest economy. Due to Congo's rampant child labor, America can get cheap cobalt for their fighter jets, and Seko can live an extravagant lifestyle, like throwing million-dollar banquets and using the Concorde plane to take shopping trips to Paris. It was a win-win for both sides. But who didn't win was the Congolese people. From 1965 to 1970, Seko crushed all opposition to his authority, holding massive 50,000-person spectacles to witness public executions. He even executed one of his former prime ministers. In 1971, he chose to rename the country Zaire, and not long after, wrote a new constitution that essentially gave him full power. The amount of money that Seko embezzled is unreal. It's estimated up to $10 billion was siphoned out of the country straight into his own pocket. While Seko drove around in luxurious Mercedes-Benz cars, the same roads that surrounded him were deteriorating. The Congolese people began to starve, and many public workers were being outright cheated out of their money. Zaire began to see rampant inflation, all while Seko was being paraded around by America and was even invited to speak at the United Nations. Most of the money that was spent was given to him by America, France, and Belgium in forms of aid. None of that money was even being verified to be going towards any kind of humanitarian efforts. America knew this and accepted the fact that the aid money was essentially bribery money to keep Zaire on America's good side. Half the foreign aid that the US gave to sub-Saharan Africa during the Cold War went straight to Zaire. That's definitely not a coincidence. In 1980, the US House of Representatives voted to terminate aid to Zaire, but the Carter administration pressured the US Senate to reinstate the funds, citing American business interests in Zaire. In the Reagan administration, things largely remained the same, and the financial aid kept rolling in. Seko seemingly had it all. He was a cult of personality and had Zaire at the palm of his hands. What could possibly go wrong? Seko's worst nightmare began in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. With the Cold War over, America abandoned him overnight and terminated all financial aid to Zaire. There was no longer any incentive for America to care about Zaire, so things quickly went south for him. Seko remarked, "I am the latest victim of the Cold War, no longer needed by the US. The lesson is that my support for American policy counts for nothing." With no more money flowing in, he knew that things were about to get really bad, really fast. In 1993, out of pure desperation, he attempted to get a visa to the United States, but was obviously denied. In 1994, during the Rwandan genocide, eastern Zaire became unstable, and with Seko's soldiers not being paid, he quickly found himself in some deep shit. Through the course of the mid-90s, his regime was overthrown, and while dying of cancer, he lived in exile the rest of his life before his death in 1997 in Morocco. Things only got much worse since he died. there would be 2 civil wars in Congo and 5 million casualties in one of the worst modern conflicts in history. There are a lot of reasons why Congo is struggling so much, but America's exploitation of a newly formed independent nation definitely catapulted Congo into what it is now. This is the story of how America exploited Congo.